Hello everyone. I think this might be everybody for today. Carrie said she can't join us today. She's distracted with something, but maybe she'll join later. Ah, Seth is also joining. Hello, Seth. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed your holidays and had a great start into the new year. I'll start with one question. Is it all right with everyone if I start uploading the recordings to YouTube? I just thought if I wait until the end, I'll probably spend the whole day just uploading. So if anybody has any concerns, just let me know. I'll probably start doing that next week. Okay. And yeah, other than that, Sean left a few comments. I also added some quotes that stood out to me and some points. Does anybody want to start with anything? No, I guess. I can hear somebody, but it's like muted.
Are we missing our, the chapter? I'm just looking for the chapter, A Radically Good Livelihood. I see Saying Yes to Purpose and then the ones beyond that. And then I see Evolving in Spiral, but do we miss one? Oh no, it's down here. Never mind. Never mind.
I don't see it anywhere actually, but radically good. This was in the last meeting, right?
Yeah.
So this time we read everything from essay 5, Saying Yes to Purpose, until the reflection Breaking Bread, which is just a bread making recipe. So I guess we can just start with essay 5, Saying Yes to Purpose. So yeah, this was just a quote that stood out to me. I don't really have anything to discuss here. Like design for collective intelligence. Like often in meetings, like if somebody just talks a lot, it gets boring for everybody. And like, I guess the advice here is to find ways to make it more participatory and engage everybody. And this is, I find this often very tricky, but there's probably a lot of workshops and facilitation skills that we could learn here, I guess. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add here. But
well, one thing I liked in the article, just to get you out of your monologue, Marcus, was that there was the study at Google that they were saying that one of the biggest like the biggest factors playing in efficiency and in teams in general was psychological safety. From my experience, that's exactly the case. Like it's, you know, it could be geniuses all around, but if the people are mean, sarcastic, or not helpful, it's just like nobody's coming up with any ideas. So that was very nicely put, that what I already knew, but now I have a nice word for it. And if I'll follow the references, maybe even that research.
It's often also like that people are not really good listeners. So everybody's just waiting for their own turn to talk, and they're already thinking about what they're going to say. So they're not really actively listening to what others are saying. And yeah, that's always something that we could like practice more often, I guess.
And that's one of my favorite things about asynchronous communication, actually, is that you can really, it's not just fast thinkers and folks who are already kind of in the mindset, but slow thinkers also get a chance to kind of really digest what's being said. And I think things are more thoughtfully digested and also archived when they're asynchronous. So it's one of my favorite things.
The Google study and the what was written about it, part of it really resonated with me because I felt like it's a challenge that is particular to remote companies. When everybody is working remotely, communication is key and collaboration is key. But the role that psychological safety plays in a remote only organization, you have to make sure that people are able to bring things up on their own without second guessing themselves or question whether their voice is worth hearing or what they are doing is worth sharing. For example, since starting at GitLab, I have had to at our CEO in several occasions, and there's always a certain level of discomfort because I know his time is extremely valuable, but I do feel like I have that opportunity, and I can bring it up to my manager. I can share challenges and problems transparently with my teammates. I think a lot of people in the tech industry tend to be introverted, and so I do think there will be something specific. There's some specific elements to make sure that people who are introverted by nature feel secure, and I think mastering that would basically set us up as a place where we have excellent psychological safety at work.
Yeah, one of the questions that I think about a lot is whether the level of transparency we have, particularly in everything's open, it's all documented, might actually hurt some of that psychological safety. Because if I go on and I add my thoughts, a strong opinion to a topic, it's there, it's archived, my name's on it. And so I wonder if that holds people back from pushing out new ideas or contradicting other people, and afraid, in a fear that they're that's memorialized, right? Because part of what we're trying to do is iterate on ideas, and sometimes our first iteration doesn't age well, and we realize like, oh, that was not a good idea, and so we might be afraid to put that up there. And we don't have any anonymity, right? Like all of our profiles are our real names, our job titles, so on and so forth. So certainly if you're anonymous on the web, you might be able to do that. There's downsides to that as well. But I'm just curious if anyone thinks that that some of the transparency and openness might actually hurt psychological safety.
I definitely agree. Thank you for bringing that up. I can think of several occasions where, even though collaboration is one of our values and it's encouraged in every way, I feel, if I was to comment on something that's outside my area of expertise, I was not particularly comfortable putting that in a public issue. I admitted that to myself that I'm not an expert in this area. There are people who know better than I do. Maybe I'm not even wording this correctly, and that would hold me back from commenting on things outside of my specific team.
I also noticed I often use very cautionary formulations in comments, just like might and may and things like that. And also something else, like the handbook says, it's good to have a low level of shame in remote work. Not just because you're on camera all the time, but also because everything is in public and all that. So that's also something I'm trying to get used to.
One thing I noticed to change in this aspect in my behavior is the level of certainty that I might have been imposing on my teammates in the previous roles, where it was just, I was saying that and nobody could actually grab me by that word and say, last week you said that things are exactly like this. You looked me straight in the eye and you said that. And now when it's actually all written down, I'm much more careful to distinguish between something I know for certain and something that I assume, which is really good. And this level of transparency helped me with that.
Should we move on to the next essay, or does anybody else have anything to add? Sean, do you want to verbalize your point?
Sure, thanks. So there's a diagram showing a pyramid, basically, with it's essentially a abstracted org chart, right? You've got individual contributors at the bottom, managers, middle managers, executives, representing these different levels of the hierarchy. I guess the reason it's not phrased like that is because it's about hierarchies in general rather than specifically companies. And one thing I always find kind of interesting about this is the tension between they talk about power going up because you set the direction, you set the strategy, the higher up you are. But because you're also not actually doing the work that is executed, you are still relying on all of the people below you. So I think having just a single arrow is useful for the point they're making, but I don't think it is just a single arrow, right? The power sort of goes both ways in a sense. Seth is the only current manager on this call, but if Seth, if your team are working on things that you don't think they should be working on, you can work on that with them, and ultimately you do have potentially the power to fire them, but you physically can't make them do that work. You can threaten them, you can encourage them, you can coach them, you can you have tools at your disposal, but you can't actually make that happen. So I think that's an aspect that I don't know, I just always find it interesting, and I think people who are in a position of executing stuff like this often sort of underrate that power, or that flexibility, that sort of agency that you have there. And then finally, to finish my monologue here, I think that I should acknowledge that this doesn't necessarily apply to every hierarchy. In the case of a company, it really depends on how replaceable you are, right? If it's super easy to get someone the next day to do your job, then maybe you don't have that much agency there. But if software engineers or support engineers or whatever, it's expensive to hire these people and hard, then you do have quite a lot of agency as a result of that. So yeah,
there's also the scarcity of talent that makes I think software development quite unique in that respect, in that it's I mean, I'm sure we probably all had that manager who's gone to manager school and does sort of what they would do with sort of maybe unskilled labor. I'm not trying to make a class distinction here or anything, but they treat us as if we're replaceable, and it turns out we're not. And there's all this knowledge that goes out with you, and they end up alienating all of their reports because they don't know, they don't understand that a lot of software folks tend to be a lot more resistant to style of management, but they can also do something about it. And I think that this often creates a large tension in organizations where the manager might be really good at sort of getting the numbers and all the sort of stuff that the higher ups want, but they're alienating the folks creating the value. And unlike less privileged folks, perhaps, we can actually do something about that, and we have a lot of power to do that. That's always something that the privilege of being in software I often think about, in that we don't really need unions as much, I think, even though I think unions are important in a lot of ways. But software unions, I feel like the scarcity of talent in software puts us in a powerful position already.
Yeah, and I think I'd almost say this more broadly, just true across knowledge, knowledge workers in general, not just software, right? If you're doing legal work or so on and so forth. But it's kind of funny because a lot of the management terminology and the way that firms organize is very, it's from like the 1900s, right? When firms and factories just started coming around. And I think what we're seeing in probably the past decade or so, we've started renaming some of these roles, right? We now have people ops. It's not human resources. Even the term resource is like, hey, I'm going to use up this resource and then throw it out. And now we're renaming these to people ops. And So I think certainly in tech, we're getting smarter about understanding like exactly like you're saying is the individual contributor has a lot more power and a lot more agency, and making sure that managers and the management structures respect that. And I would say, you know, I think most of the innovation that comes in the industry tends to be at the contributor level, right? You don't have like some manager coming up with this great brilliant idea. It's the contributor who's working in the code every day saying, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? And then the ideas kind of bubble up from there. And I think that's, you know, like when you talk about facilitation and workshop, a lot of times it is to try to get those people to share those ideas because management beats them down and says, hey, don't share your ideas.
Yeah, I think that industrial revolution concept of how a company works is something I keep meaning to read more into as well, because like it feels like it does have quite sort of long lasting effects on how, you know, not just companies but especially businesses, you know, work these days. And like, you know, a lot of things sort of come from that model of sort of because I guess that was the first time you could have a bunch of people working in a single business. So, you know, that's where it came from. So yeah, I definitely want to read more about that in future, I think.
And I think one of the reasons that those models kind of persist is no one's really figured out how to measure productivity or output from knowledge workers, right? It's something that's like, well, how valuable is that person? How do you quantify that? Whereas if you have like an industrial, you know exactly how many widgets, you know, someone on the line made, and you can fire them, hire them, promote them, whatever, based on how many widgets they're making. The software, you know, there's no real good model for this, and no one's really cracked the code on that.
It's not lines of code, that's for sure.
Yeah. Even within that, I read, hey, this is kind of off the topic. I read a book recently, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist, which is about, it's a long book. I'm not going to go into all the details. It's about a crew of painters and decorators in England in the early 20th century, and basically how they are exploited or participate in their exploitation by the managers of the company. And you know, part of it is like, you know, maybe it was 6 pence a day for this type of work, and someone's desperate for work because there's not much employment, so they take 5.5 pence a day, and then suddenly that's sort of the benchmark that everyone else is using. But also it sort of talks about how it's kind of like a lemon market, in that the customer is constantly cheated. Like, you know, they're not getting the quality of work that they think they're getting and that they're paid for. And so the incentive for the company competing against other companies, and the incentive within the company for the individual supervisors and then for the individual painters, is to do things as quickly as possible while not making it obvious that they've been done badly, which is obviously a terrible incentive. But I think that comes from the same sort of thing of like, you know, it being hard to sort of measure, you know, you can measure how quickly it's done, but it's harder to measure how well it's done. And, you know, not being able to have that quality side of things makes it very difficult. Whereas obviously in some industries, you do have that quality step, and it's much easier to measure both factors.
Greg, you put down a question here. Do you want to vocalize that?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I just accidentally closed that. All right, here we are. So I felt for essay 6, right at the very beginning, there's bold questions about companies. Says you work for a company, you work at a company, you work with a company, maybe you own the company. I would extend these questions to any company. You don't have to work at it, as a thought experiment. And the questions they have are, why does this company exist? How does it serve your life? And what does it do? So I initially thought about this, how I would answer this for GitLab. And I think my answer would depend on how much time you have. Sometimes it's great to have a elevator pitch, but I think that for a lot of companies, these questions do generate a lot of interesting thoughts, and allows you to view companies beyond just the revenue and the stock value, and see what problems they're solving and how it helps people solve those problems.
Yeah, I still struggle to explain what GitLab is exactly, like to people like my parents or generally non-technical people. And I think a contributor they have a session like how to explain GitLab in 5 minutes or something. I missed that last time, but I will try to join it next time. So I guess this ties in with my next point on the impact theory, the open startup. So like it was mentioned, the companies with a social mission. So Enspiral is very focused on like social impact, social enterprises and things like that. And GitLab isn't really like that. Like we are a VC in a funded startup and we're profit driven mainly. But we also have like our mission of everyone can contribute, or the longer version is like change all creative work from read only to read write. And to me, this has like huge social implications as well. So in a way, we do have a social mission kind of. And also the other thing is our advocacy of remote work, which is also a social thing in a way. And also one of our, it's almost like our second mission in a way. I'm not really sure if it's explicitly written like that somewhere. But yeah, this was one of the big reasons why I actually joined GitLab. It's not just a tech company, but it really has like a bigger purpose, basically. And I'm curious how others see this mission.
Yeah, I'll say I agree. I think one of the things that's really attractive to me is some of the ideas of the open source, the transparency, the remote work. For me, that is some of the social mission is proving that it works and proving that we can make that work at a large scale organization. And I think that will have very, very large impacts to the tech industry and to kind of the knowledge working industry in general. And I think going public obviously increases the visibility of that because no one's really done it at the scale that GitLab has. And so if we are able to pull it off and say, hey, look, we can build a successful, profitable company with all of these values, which most people think some of our values don't work, right? Like they don't think that transparency is beneficial to a company. They don't think people do their jobs when they're working remotely. And so for me, proving that these values actually help build a successful company is part of the mission I see.
Sorry, no, you go, Greg.
Oh, I just wanted to echo what Seth just shared and say that I was actually a member of the open source community, a user of GitLab for about 2 years before starting. I was an active contributor on the GitLab forum, and I had my first MR to the GitLab EE code base before I got a job offer. And I would say a large reason that GitLab is at the top of my list for employers is because of our everybody can contribute, and changing from read-only to read-write, as well as our values. I'd say that is a driver for talent. And if we have co-developers instead of just users, people take ownership over our product and they're personally invested in a way that having closed source proprietary software, it's just not an option to contribute to. I feel tension after working at GitLab for so long when there's a product that customers rely on and they don't have a way for them to create an issue or get involved in the discussion or involve anybody in product or development in the equation. And I think that is a really competitive advantage that GitLab has and a value add to our company.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's because GitLab's open core, I'm kind of reluctant to speak about it as purely open source. Like the thing is, you can still contribute to the proprietary code base if you want to. Like, there's, I wish that happened more often. Like, you know, I do like free and open source software. I do especially appreciate copy, which GitLab isn't. But
You might cut out just a little bit.
yeah,
there.
sorry, I was saying I especially appreciate copyleft software, which GitLab isn't. But you know, any free and open source software is good. But even for software that is proprietary, there's a lot of times where I'm like, look, even if it is proprietary, I just want to help you fix this. Like, oh, I want to fix this because I need this to work. You know, like, I don't care about the license so much as that, you know, I do care about the license, but I care more about like just being able to fix this myself. So yeah, I definitely agree there. And going back to what Seth said, I sort of, I wax and wane on this a little bit. Sometimes I'm more, done it again. Sometimes I'm more enthusiastic about like the way GitLab works, and sometimes I'm less enthusiastic. But even when I'm less enthusiastic, I think the thing that always sort of brings me back to my sort of center point is that even if I left GitLab, which I have no intention of doing at the moment, I would want any company I join to work in a very similar way, or to make it work in a similar way, in, you know, as I spent my time there. So I think that's probably a very good sign about how we work right now. That like because like Seth said, you know, this could have a huge impact on how other companies work anyway. But like, you know, for you know, just for me personally, if I moved to another company, I'd be like, well, can we do things like, can we steal the GitLab handbook? Like they say the Lumio handbook can be stolen, sorry, the Inspiral handbook can be stolen as well, right? Like, you know, put it out there because you want people to work that way. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I like the bit when they were saying that it's not just software, but they are open sourcing the processes, which is exactly what GitLab is doing, and what I haven't heard about till I joined GitLab. I saw the handbook, and now I'm reading about it again. It's really nice to be transparent because people can like read through it and give you feedback even without working at the company.
The first time that I joined an open source, like I'd done open source stuff before, but the first time I joined an entirely open source company was it was one of my clients back in like 2016 or something, and I was with them for like 2 years, and they used all open source stuff. If they used something, it had to be free and open source. They just said if it's proprietary, we just won't use it. And there was a lot of anxiety for me going to an open, like putting everything that I did open source, because you hear horror stories about, you know, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like doing something and then some angry commentator is like, you idiot, like, you know, and there's always that kind of sort of risk that you're putting yourself out there in a big way. And but I mean, I do that now, and I think it's okay. And I love how we encourage other people to put themselves out there as well, because we've got a culture that supports that. You know, people supporting each other in a real way, as we're all out there.
So I guess let's move on to the next one, resource blueprints. Sean, you wrote down something here. Do you want to vocalize it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a paper book here, and I got an e-reader at Christmas, and I was like, why didn't I get one of these before? But one of the things, you know, I do like physical books, but one of the things you can do with an e-reader is like search within the book. And two things that I kept thinking they would mention, but then not remembering seeing the words, and they may have mentioned them and I just completely blanked it from my memory. Cooperatives and mutual organizations, which are slightly different. I think they're closer to a co-op in Spiral for sure. But I think they're both sort of interesting organization structures that, you know, are no longer new, but are still interesting, if that makes sense. So I don't know if other people felt that, or if other people sort of had examples of similar organizations where they live. Like, you know, I know of ones in the UK because that's where I'm from, but like, you know, I'm not very well versed on like, you know, if they're common elsewhere or not.
So I actually have the ebook version as well, but for some reason it doesn't support searching. It's like the text is an image or something. So I was actually looking if those words are mentioned anywhere else. So I couldn't do that. But I just want to say from my other reading I've done about Inspiral, it's definitely like an inspiration, like cooperatives and mutual organizations. And I think Inspiral, the foundation itself, is also a co-op. I'm not sure. But at least Lumio is one. I know that for sure. But I think Inspire the Foundation is also like owned by the members, right, Charlie?
Yeah, there's those sort of three layers. There's sort of the friends, which are kind of people who are, you know, contacts of the network but not actually in it, and then contributors who are kind of people who are in the network, and then you've got the members who are kind of the core. That may be different now, and I'm pretty sure it's the sort of same structure, but every member has one share. So as soon as you become a member, which you have to be sort of voted in by the other members, so you get one share, and then that's your ownership of Inspiral. And so when I stopped being a member, I just gave up my share, and then that was it. So it is a co-op, but not of everyone. So that's probably a distinction worth noting.
But it's also legally a co-op, like whatever is the co-op equivalent in New Zealand, I guess.
I'm just going to quickly look it up on the company's register for New Zealand.
I actually had a look, but I couldn't make sense of it. It's linked somewhere. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So this was just a one-pager about their handbook. And I just browsed around the site a bit. I like how small it is compared to ours. And they have one page of, they call it content dusting, like a regular practice to go through the content and see if it's still current or could be updated. And yeah, I guess we could use some of that in our own handbook. I think we're in the process of building up a new handbook team that will take care of some things like that. I'm not sure if it's more of a technical development team.
I think incentives for the handbook are similar to our incentives for the product, where the incentives are very much biased in favor of additions rather than removals. So I think that probably explains that. Charlie, you looked it up?
Yeah, so just put it in the notes there. Inspiral is legally a NZ limited company, but I don't know enough about New Zealand business law or anything like that to know if they did that, but they will have done that very thoughtfully. So it would not be like, because they had lawyers in the network in that. So and those folks, I know a lot of them personally who were part of setting that up, and they would have done so with this very deliberately. So I think I'm not sure if New Zealand has a co-op as a thing legally, but they're a New Zealand limited company. But yeah, they do behave as a co-op, because I think you can just run it however you want as long as it's in your constitution.
And yeah, the other section in the handbook I liked was the agreements section. So they have like a dozen formal agreements. And at GitLab, we have some sections in the handbook that are like more like agreements. The main one is, I guess, is the code of conduct that we actually have to sign. So I think that's the only legal agreement we have. And the rest is a bit scattered across the handbook, which makes sense, I guess, to be in the section where it makes sense, but it's also a bit hard to find all the agreements that we have.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing that kind of popped up, was that sometimes you'd have an agreement with some people, and this isn't in any group. You get an agreement that some people have made, and then new people come in. Well, what if they don't agree? They didn't agree to the agreement. So what if they're like, actually, I don't want to work this way, or I don't want to do it this way? Are they bound to the agreement? Because if they didn't sign anything legally, then you know, you can't really coerce them to do that. Or you can try. You can use social means. But again, with dissent, managing dissent is a really interesting process. And it kind of, comes back to, oh golly, sorry, I couldn't remember who was talking about the transparency being a really tricky thing, because dissent also becomes a lot harder, I think. In any group, dissenting already has a social cost. And I think nurturing dissent, like dissent that is tactful and kind and appropriate. And I think really valuing the risk that the person took to dissent is a really important part. And we've had many, in Spiral, we had many talks about that. And we always had to kind of remind everyone sort of collectively, remember that, just green thumbing on a decision, just, oh yeah, sure, is fine. But it can be really hard to be the red thumb or the in a field of green thumbs. So really think about your agreement, not just going along with whatever's been proposed, but also really being thoughtful around what do we not, what are our failure modes. It's okay to think negatively. It's okay to think about the failure modes and the way that things can go sideways. So I really like nurturing dissent as a thing, but like I say, nice dissent, kind dissent, and appropriate tactful dissent.
I think
Okay,
one way. Oops,
Yep. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think one way that GitLab tries to tackle the problem you were just discussing with dissent, while remaining transparent and public by default, is one is to assume positive intent. If you really take it into account that the person on the other end is trying to help our company and our users and our customers, then putting that in that perspective, seeing what they're saying from that perspective can change how you would respond. I also think that it is in our handbook or values to give negative feedback in a small setting, and share positive feedback publicly. We have a Slack channel just for thanking people, and it's encouraged to do so. So I think those two ways are some ways we can handle dissent without having to sacrifice transparency.
I have to say, I love short toes as a value. I just love it so much.
Okay, so we're almost at time. Does anybody want to add anything about the stuff in the next two sections?
No, I just, not from the quotes that I added. I just the section on collective reflections, a lot of those quotes mentioned hierarchy. I pasted a couple in there, but there was a bunch talking about that, so I thought that was interesting about the different ways they looked at it.
Definitely, yeah. Like the section was just like a huge collection of quotes, and each of them was interesting in its own way. Then below you wrote like self-leadership, similar to managers of one, which is also something we call out in our handbook. Like when we're hiring people, we're looking for managers of one. I agree, yeah. And yeah, just something else I wrote here, like I sometimes wonder what it would be like if I could just work on anything I wanted and not really have like a team where we plan and decide what everybody works on. But of course, it's also nice to work in a team and have like this consistent group of people. And also, in a way, it's already possible to just say, I want to work on this for a while and just talk to your manager and plan it appropriately. I'm not sure if the staff engineers more or less work in this mode or if they're still embedded in a team, but yeah.
They probably have like a home team and they just float around looking for cracks between teams. Is that right, Sean?
I know I've got quite a bit of, like, my main job is well, actually I'm in kind of an unusual position as a staff engineer because there's also a distinguished engineer on the same team. So, I don't have some of the responsibilities that sort of implied by being the most senior technical person on the team. Yeah, my job is basically because we're quite a project focused team as opposed to the product teams, which are like, have a bunch of different things going on at once. We typically have one thing going on at once. So my job is largely to contribute to that project by doing stuff myself, but also contribute to that project by making sure other people are unblocked, and nobody's ever stuck around waiting for something to do because they don't understand what the next thing is, or like how you would go about doing it or whatever. But I do make quite a lot of time for just like fixing stuff that bugs me. So yeah, I think anybody can do that. Like we have people in the support team who contribute fixes or write separate tools. Like I know Wei Meng in particular has contributed some really cool features, and Will as well has worked on some cool tooling. So yeah, I think most people have the flexibility to do that. It's just hard to realize that you have the flexibility to do it and really believe that you have the flexibility to do it a lot of the time.
And also just have the right time management skills, I guess, to keep on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we had time. So next meeting is in 2 weeks again. That works for everybody. So yeah, thanks for the conversation and have a nice weekend.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.